when I left to start this little nonprofit. We hosted this big concert, and it was a Christian music festival, and 3 days and 40 bands and stages, and it just failed miserably. We needed about 5,000 people to attend, and about 800 attended. And it just crushed us financially. And I remember standing in a field, and I'm just screaming at God, 3 a.m. I did all this for you. Why would you do this to me? I was now kind of the embarrassment of the Detroit area. And now all of a sudden I found myself in 6 figures worth of debt, and 3 a.m. screaming at God, why would you do this to me? It was the first time I thought about taking my own life. Sorry, not to go like crazy deep here. Apologize. I walked back to my camper. I opened the door, and there was my wife and 3 little kids. I was like, okay.
Welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast. My name is Dr. Tom Rundell, and I am the curator of conversations around here. And the conversation I have curated for you today for this liminal space that you may find yourself in, it is an interesting one, a fun one. I am interviewing a friend of mine, best friend, mentor. We've known each other for 28 years. His name is Jason Raitz. Jason is currently leading a small business called Speak with People, where he teaches healthy communication to different businesses and churches and schools, people who are in a leadership or management capacity that needs to learn healthy communication. And I met him as a teenager in Mountain Jags. That's a steakhouse, and we talk about that a little bit. And our journey started there together. And he has been through the church world, through and through. He's seen the ugly side. He's seen the beautiful side as a pastor. And we have some honest conversations about his experience as a pastor, some things that he's learned, some things that he would do different, some things that have hurt him, and some things that are beautiful. And, many of you are deconstructing theologically, and you're not sure what to believe about this or that. There's lots of different ways to deconstruct. Jason swims in the evangelical streams, I was also there for a while. He is remaining in that camp. He's not deconstructing theologically. Jason is more deconstructing ecclesiologically, which I mean is like the role of the church and the role of the pastor and how it should function. And he really has not landed in a place. He's in a liminal place of, I'm not sure about things. And we just kind of go through his story of his ups and his downs throughout his pastoral career. And it's a honest and beautiful and messy conversation. So I'm going to invite you into this liminal space of Jason's life here with this conversation. Well, Jason Raitz, welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast. This has been in the making. This episode here has been in the making for about a year now. We've been waiting on this thing.
Well, sometimes you have to wait for the really good stuff.
Good things come to those who wait, or
yes,
something like that. But we actually started recording a podcast, but then I had a family emergency at home. We had to stop. And I ran off, and I was like, we're going to have to revisit this one. And now here we are, and it is official.
I love it. I'm so honored to be a part. Can't wait. I love your podcast and love what you're doing and the conversations you're having. And so it's honored to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. Now, how long have we been friends now? I mean, it's been a long time.
It's been a long time. I mean, it goes back to the mid 90s. I think we said 1996.
Yeah. So that means we can actually say that our friendship started in the late 20th century.
Yes, we can. And we'll be coming up on our 30-year anniversary.
That's right.
Or celebration of our friendship. And so in a couple of years, we're going to have to do a big party.
Right, which you just had me on your live stream, and I said maybe we should have a vow renewal for our 30-year. Or maybe we can exchange those gifts, the anniversaries, like the gold and the silver and the diamond. And I don't know what 30 is, but we're going to have to look into it.
I love it. Speaking of that, I know this is a lame joke, but I just saw this meme about the wise men, and they're like, if it would have been wise women who would have brought, the gifts, they would have brought things that were actually practical,
Here's some diapers.
For a baby. Have you seen that one?
Yeah, I like that one. I am a meme collector. I think I have more memes than I do photos now. So I've just shifted in what I use my camera for.
You do like a good meme. But what I appreciate most about you, not so much your memes. Your memes are great, and I love receiving them when I do. But I mean, we're talking like almost 30 years. You have been a unbelievably consistent and encouraging, supportive listener. I mean, cheerleader, wise sage. I don't know, my friend. I'm just so appreciative of you, and, just thank you for being a friend for so many years.
Yeah. And that's back at you. You've been there for me in the highs and the lows. And I wouldn't have even met my wife if it wasn't for you. So you brought me to the town and the church that I met Kara at. So I am exactly who I am today because of a lot of your influence, and I'm always grateful. So
absolutely.
28 years.
Well, that was fun because we tried to set you guys up, and that was a blast. I remember that day.
Oh, yeah.
We did this big concert at the church, remember? And you were running around, and there was a couple of us in a huddle, and we're like, look at that woman over there. She'd be perfect for Tom. We didn't know her at all. We didn't know her story, but we just assumed you guys would be perfect.
And you were all correct. And
it was like love at first sight for not us, love at first sight for a friend.
That's the one. That's the one. Yep. And it totally worked. Now we've got some history here. We
got some history.
Yeah,
history.
Long history, and we were friends back in the late 1900s.
Yes, we were.
Now I met you when I was a teenager. I was 16 or 17, working at Mountain Jack Steakhouse. You were a cook there. I was a dishwasher. And you invited me to your church because you were the youth pastor there. And I had left that church because I wanted to work more. And so I was like, you invited me back to my own church, which was a real weird circle. But yeah, that was interesting. That was back in our very fundamentalist days.
We were very fundamentalists. And I remember inviting you that first time. I'm like, I'm doing an evangelistic thing. This is going to be great. And you're like, oh, yeah, I used to go to that church.
Yeah, trying to save my soul. And really the thing that sparked it for me was not you intentionally like handing me tracts or like arguing at me or telling me anything. It was you were arguing with Chef James. You remember Chef James?
Oh, of course. Absolutely.
At Mountain Jack's. You were arguing with him around the corner from where I was standing. And he was, I was driving you to work because your 66 red Mustang Fastback was not working, but my hatchback red Chevette with Mustang hubcaps was working. So I was driving you to work, but I only had to go like 2 blocks out of my way to get to your house. And Chef James, he was that real financial minded person, and he was arguing with you about you should be paying me gas money for driving you there. And you were like, it's 2 blocks really. Like, I don't know, what am I going to do? Leave a quarter on his seat or something? And you're going back and forth, and it was kind of getting heated, and I'm overhearing everything. Like, this is getting good. They're talking about me. And then you just blurted back at him, well, maybe he's just trying to help out a brother in Christ. And then everything inside of me was just like, oh, I guess I am. And that is my quote unquote conversion story right there. Growing up in the church and never caring about it. And then boom, you're arguing around the corner with Chef James about me, and it changed my life.
Just all clicked.
It did. Yeah.
And that really started off. I mean, it was a crazy run. The next, however many years we did crazy things in youth ministry, hundreds and hundreds. I mean, we're at a small little conservative church, and we had hundreds and hundreds of kids attending events, and it was wild. We got into a lot of trouble at that first church, a lot of trouble.
Yeah. You're the one who taught me the phrase, what was it? Forgiveness is easier than permission.
Yeah.
When you're knocking down a cinder block wall in the basement, you're like, did you get permission from the board on this? It's like, we'll get forgiveness later. Yeah, that was the sub-basement nuclear fallout shelter.
It was a sub basement. And every like 2 months when it flooded, you and I had to move everything out, mop everything. Sorry to be a little skeptical right off the beginning, because I don't want to, push your listeners away. But it was one of those moments in my young pastoral leadership where I thought, okay, this church really does not want to invest financially in their students. Mm-hmm. I mean, we literally have enough money for maybe popcorn, and they won't even, I don't even think the janitor cleaned our rooms. Like we had to do it.
That was my job.
Oh my goodness. It was just crazy.
Yeah. And I remember Nancy, I don't remember her last name, but she was the wife of the custodian, who his name was Larry. And I don't know how I even know their names. Well, I remember Nancy because I went upstairs to get the broom, because that room was monstrous. And I got that big, 4-foot push broom thing. And she just chewed me out about using the custodian's stuff. And she hands me this little kitchen broom, I was like, you want me to sweep the entire basement with this little thing? Yep. And she was, I had never seen somebody so angry. I was just like holding a broom. That's it. I was like, I just received her wrath that day.
Yep.
That was crazy.
For the course of as long as I can remember, people told me, parents, grandparents, teachers, pastors told me, you're going to be a pastor someday. You're going to be a pastor someday. And I ran from it. I didn't want to be a pastor. I didn't want to be a pastor because at 13 years old, my dad was my youth pastor, which I loved. Tom, my dad, my mom. They are incredible people. It's the best youth group experience ever. We were at a little inner city church in Detroit, and a new pastor had come to town, and he brought this newfangled guitar music, and all of a sudden, homeless people were being fed, and people who were not a part of the church were attending, and people of the wrong color were attending, and the youth group was growing, and the established core of the church, from my perspective, they were not happy with it. Mm-hmm. They didn't like the changes. They didn't like all the new people. And there was one guy in particular who just gave my dad a hard time all the time. And I remember at 13 years old, I was coming up from another church sub-basement, and I was at the bottom of the stairs, and I could hear screaming. And it was that guy screaming at my dad at the top of his lungs. And I thought the guy was going to hit my dad. And he was mad because the wrong kind of kids were coming to the youth group. Why would you let those people in our building? This is sacred and holy. And at that time, I remember I was 13. I don't know what year that would have been, 88, somewhere back then. I said, God, I don't ever want to be a pastor. I just never. Don't make me do this, which was really difficult because I love the church. I love, all the youth group stuff we did. I grew up in a really godly, conservative, fundamental home. My parents were passionate about Jesus. They grew up Catholic and Lutheran, and then they met Jesus, and they went deep end to, the Bible was always open at our house. We played Bible trivia. My parents were always quizzing each other on the Bible. They truly had a passion for I look back now and I'm like, I wish I had 1/10 of that passion or modeled that to my kids as much as my parents did for me. But all of my parents' family basically disowned them. They just did not. These are these Jesus people. My parents went to the super conservative Nate Bargatze. If you've never heard of him, he's just an incredible comedian. He's a really clean comedian. He's all the rage right now. He talks about having Christian fundamental parents in the 80s. And, I know you can relate to this, but I couldn't watch, He-Man or, Smurfs or, I remember when they threw away hundreds of their albums, AC/DC and all this kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
And so we were just always in this godly family. I love the pastor of the church. But then that day, after all those years of people telling me you're going to be a pastor someday, I begged God, don't ever make me a pastor. I don't want to be a pastor. And it wasn't much longer after that. My dad, the pastor of the church, my mom was the secretary. We're all pushed out. And then a string of family deaths happened for my parents. 3 of their parents died in a 3-year span, and it was just hell on earth and horrible. And I was just sort of in a church wasteland because, I was in high school now. I didn't want to go to church. I didn't want to be a part of church. And when I was 19, I went to a Sunday school convention with my girlfriend and her grandma. The grandma bribed us to come. There was no cell phones. There was nothing to do but sit on this hot wooden pew in this Baptist church on a Saturday. But she was giving us gas money and she was taking us to Big Boy. And I mean, we're going to have the time of our life. And all of those years of not wanting to be a pastor, not wanting to be a part of the church anymore. This young guy, I don't remember his name. He was an evangelist from New York City. He was talking about all the kids they were reaching. Something just clicked. I was not the, audible voice of God, but it was, definitely the Holy Spirit saying, you got to stop running. And I did. And so I transferred from, I was going to school to be a music teacher. I transferred from Eastern Michigan University to a little Bible college, William Tyndale Bible College, no longer in existence. Both Dr. Tom and I are both graduates of that fine institution.
Alumni.
But I very quickly applied and got in and started, I was like, okay, I got to go down this road. And literally 3 months in, I saw a job posting on a bulletin board because there were no computers in the school.
I remember that bulletin board.
And I saw a job posting, Covenant Community Church hiring a youth pastor. And I looked up the address, I went home and, you got out the atlas, the map, and it was in my neighborhood. It was, blocks away.
It was like 2 blocks from your house.
2 blocks. I knew nothing about the church. I sent my resume, had my name. I had been a varsity coach for a baseball team for Christian school. I was a cook at the restaurant you and I worked at. And this church called me. Like, I still don't understand it. They were a very Bible believing Baptist church, very traditional, hymns and suits and dresses and, very, very conservative. And here I am at 19, almost 20 years old, being called in to interview in front of committee and then the next committee and then the next committee. And then finally I'm 20 years old sitting in front of 100 people of students and parents and elders and they're just quizzing me. And I had interned previously at a AG church because I was like, oh, something's exciting going on at this AG church. Like, this is nothing like my Lutheran church, when I was growing up. And they were really afraid of that because, they were more on the Bible believing Baptistic side, which they were worried they were worried I was going to bring the Holy Spirit in. But maybe the gifts, I'm not sure. But I sat in front of all those interviews and to this day, I have no idea why they hired me. I mean, I have no idea. All these years later. So 1995, I start as the youth pastor, had not one clue, but tons of passion for Jesus. And very, very quickly, I started running into those walls.
Yes. Literal,
very much so. And then you and I, we tore down that wall because our youth group was growing like crazy.
Yep.
I very quickly learned that, hey, forgiveness is easier than permission is not the best life philosophy. So what was it like being a youth pastor at that young age? It was humbling. It was exhilarating. I had an older pastor. He was very dignified. He, was just the pastor. He was really not a leader, and really not even a shepherd. I'd put him more in like the teacher professor category.
Oh yeah.
And so,
his name was Dalton. I mean, if you're going to have a name like Dalton. Right. And his first name was just the letter H. Remember that? H. Dalton Myers. Oh, great guy. I mean, he loves scripture, but we just kind of ran amok and and it was 3 years later. That's as long as I took it. The youth group grew. I mean, we had, just hundreds of kids coming, we did all these events. I mean, it was, all this energy, but I couldn't take the negative onslaught anymore. I couldn't take the fingers in my face telling me kids shouldn't have hats on in the sanctuary. It was just all the things that added up. And I left and then got a job at another church and then, kind of kept going. So that's what it was like being a young youth pastor. Yeah. And that picture of your dad being yelled at on the stairs by a man and you're like, I'd never want to experience that. And now you find yourself across from your desk is one of the parents of the students, and now they're yelling at you and reaming you out. And it's like, I didn't really know that story about your dad. But there you are, in the same role.
Yeah, absolutely. I just had never expected it. Cause you and I, it was like, we felt like it was a move of God, all these kids from the neighborhood. I mean, kids that never step into a church building, we were just having the time of our life. And this parent came in, sat across from me, and for an hour, he just berated me. I mean, there was nothing kind in his words. His tone was harsh and sharp and mean. He said things like, how do you expect to disciple our kids when you're fat? Oh my goodness. I was 21 years old. I look back at pictures of me at 21. I'm like, look at that ripped son of a gun. Like he was and so this guy, I mean, he just tore into me and, okay. So he was unhappy that, all these kids from the neighborhood were coming and, they were worried that I was teaching bad theology. But yeah, there I was, right back at it. And I can, it's 26 years I served vocationally as a pastor, youth pastor. Then I went to, I dreamt forever of being a mega church youth pastor. So then I started working at the mega church in the Detroit area. And then I, dreamt of working at like the mega church. And so then I finally got to Willow Creek, and I was like, oh my goodness, my idol, Bill Hybels, if his aura would just, fall off on me, this would be the greatest thing ever. And then I planted a church, and I can honestly say almost every stop. And I don't know if it's because I'm a four and I'm up and down and I'm, my emotions are everywhere and I'm always trying to lasso them around. But every stop I prayed that same prayer that I prayed when I was 13, God, why would you do this to me? And so I don't know, looking back now, if it was just my lack of wisdom in situations. I don't know if it was just my makeup. Like if I wasn't strong enough to be a pastor to deal with the amount of criticism and the amount of pain, especially my early years of being a pastor, like I had the biggest, you can attest to this. You can, probably tell me pretty clearly. I had the biggest head in the world. I wanted to be the next, whoever the next person was at that point. I wanted to have the biggest youth group. I wanted to, I wanted to be Doug Fields' best friend. You remember Doug Fields, back in the day, like my contentment was out of control because I was just never content. I wanted to be at the big church, and then I got to the big church, and then that wasn't enough. And then I wanted to be at the bigger church. And it wasn't until God really humbled me when I left to start this little nonprofit, and we hosted this big concert, and it was a Christian music festival and 3 days and, 40 bands and stages, and it just failed miserably. The event was great. Everybody loved it, except we needed about 5,000 people to attend, and about 800 attended. And it just crushed us financially. And I remember standing in a field. I think this would have been June 3rd, 2005. And I'm just screaming at God, 3 a.m. I did all this for you. Why would you do this to me? I was now kind of the embarrassment of the Detroit area. Maybe more in my terms than maybe actuality, but I was sort of becoming the youth pastor. I had done interviews on the Christian radio station, and I was speaking all over the place. And I just thought really highly of myself. Like I was the number one fan in my own fan club. And I launched out on my own because my mega church had some things that I didn't like about it. And I let my pride and arrogance get in the way. And the event, it just failed financially. And now all of a sudden I found myself in 6 figures worth of debt, and 3 a.m. screaming at God, why would you do this to me? Why would you allow this to happen? And it was the first time I thought about taking my own life. Sorry, not to go like crazy deep here. Apologize, but
go there.
It was rough, and I walked back to my camper because we hosted this event, at this little, well, actually, I think it was a former dump turned into a campground.
Yeah.
But I opened the door, and there was my wife and 3 little kids. I had a 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 5-year-old. And I was like, okay, like, even though this big giant event failed, I'm not a failure. So from there, went and worked at Willow Creek Church. And I definitely had a different perspective on contentment, had a different perspective on pride. Once your pride is obliterated, I always say I want to write a book called In a Field, on a stool with a shattered heart, basically kind of the concept of like, I'm in the place that I wanted to be, but the stool was knocked out from under me and, my heart shattered, that kind of idea.
Mm-hmm.
But God had, something great. And so I find myself at Willow Creek at this, giant mega church. And I fell in love. Like I re-fell in love with the church. As Bill Hybels, I would sit in staff meeting and hear him cast vision for, the local church is the hope of the world, right? Like if you sit and hear him talk about that, and then seeing, the craziness all around you, baptism weekends with thousands of people being baptized, and then the leadership summits and, the serving things that they did in the community. I re-fell in love. I don't know if that's the right word. Sorry. Re-fell in love. I fell back in love with the local church and just dove, right in, and loved it. And, wanted to be a pastor again so bad, and was loving everything, at Willow. And then I had to leave.
Yeah. I remember talking, you kept wanting to hire me at Willow. I was a pastor at a small, medium-sized country church. And I was like, no, I want to retire from this church. I want to stay at this church forever. I love it here. And you're like, no, come to Willow. It's great. And then I noticed in our conversations that started to shift, and you were starting to feel pressure, from the higher ups, and they were feeling the pressure from the higher ups. And there's like this, like pressure from on high kept coming down through the ranks until it landed in your lap. And there was so much pressure to perform and to be excellent and to be perfect and to reach the masses and do the numbers. And you were really wired for that. But then, when that big music festival kind of imploded and you had that moment, like there was something that shifted in you. But then there was like this shift in you at Willow where you're like, I'm in like the place, but then all this pressure to be excellent and big and amazing. Like, how did you handle all of that pressure? What was that like? And what did you do with it?
Yeah. In the beginning, I loved it, cause I think probably this would have been my early 30s. I was probably a peer 3, driver, wanted to succeed. But then I also, like you talked about, I kind of had been brought back to earth, and, I just never subscribed to the philosophy that I learned at the bigger churches, which was tasks over people. I've learned a few things over 26 years of serving at churches where, there are some tactics, there are some systems things, there are some tasks that leaders can do if they do them with enough excellence that you can get any size crowd you want. You can get people to be a part of. You have enough hype. Okay, you got people there. But what I started to notice at Willow, and I was like off the shoot, like I loved it. I mean, I was having the time of my life. We'd be sitting there and it'd, be staff meeting day, and Hybels would walk up and he's like, oh, my friend Henry Cloud was in town. He's going to talk at staff meeting today. Things like that were, tremendous. I was like, oh, wow. One time we saw Tony Blair, the Prime Minister of England, walking with Hybels in the lobby. And let me just say this. I don't mean to speak ill will of anyone. Hybels, when we were there, wasn't really, a pastor of the people, right? Like he was, kind of a busy guy flying off to meet with, presidents and, all this kind of stuff. So internally, we had a game called Spot the Hybes, where we got at different points, in different positions where we saw Bill Hybels. And so if it was in the lobby, it was 5 points. If it was with a dignitary, it was 50 points. I probably shouldn't say stories like this, but my brother actually won because he spotted Hybels at a liquor store. And we're like, okay, and Bill never kept it a secret. He had a love for wine, that wasn't like a, deal. But like, I go back to my Bible, Baptist days. I'm like, oh no.
Yeah.
So I love the atmosphere. I love the performance atmosphere. Every quarter we had that performance evaluation. You got an A, B, or C. You knew if you got a C, you had 90 days to improve it or you were done. That was just it. And so there was this giant turnover. I was there sort of like in kind of the end, the end of the beginning of the heyday season, kind of Bill's last, 10 years or so. And so, they were like moving and shaking, wanting to raise up the next generation. And so, they were raising up leaders. And so I kind of fit in, but I was working 70 hours a week, 65, 60. My kids were little. I think back now, my weekends were totally gone because we had 4 junior high services over the weekend. And so I had to be there at 1 o'clock on a Saturday, left at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night, there at 7 on Sunday, left at 2 on Sunday. My boss was someone who just didn't believe that people should get 2 days off. And so, we took Mondays off and then Tuesday we were right back at it, and it was just, I joked a lot that I didn't need to leave my office ever. I just needed to, recruit leaders, keep the system going, and I didn't, I never got time with kids, so it was rough. So I loved being in that perspective until I started an MBA. And the MBA really screwed up my life because Willow was really passionate about, their staff getting higher education degrees, and probably more on the MBA side because, they were, Harvard studied them, right, for, organizational leadership and all that kind of stuff. So I started an MBA, and there's a book right behind me that, I think there's a handful of books that drastically ruined and changed my life. And that book is Primal Leadership by Daniel Goleman, who's kind of the emotional intelligence guru. Mm-hmm. And I started to read it, and I had so many aha moments that went like this. Wait a minute. We don't have to abuse people, when we work with them. We don't have to power abuse them. We don't have to manipulate them. We don't have to control them. And, that book and that leadership class I took in my MBA, it ruined me because at that point, it basically started my downfall from Willow Creek because I started putting on the brakes. My first day on staff, I was sat down by 4 of the existing staff, and they just said, we want to give you a really realistic what's going to happen. You're brand new. You got lots of energy. You're going to say yes to everything. In 2 years, you're going to be absolutely dead inside. And that's pretty much what happened. I wanted to please my boss. My boss had been there 20 years. And I said yes to everything until I started an MBA. And then we also had a house fire in there. Oh, geez, that's another story for another day. Mm-hmm. But we were actually renting a house from Bill's son, Todd, which, like you don't ever want the house to burn down that Bill Hybels, co-owns. And so, it was all over the paper. Of course, our names weren't listed, but,
Bill
it's kind of big
house.
News. Yeah. So we lost everything. So you talk about, you talk about a life altering event. We had 4 little kids, babies, and we lost everything. Like in one afternoon, it was all gone. January 9th, 2009, everything gone except for 2 Rubbermaid containers. And I will say this about the leaders, the Willow culture, and why I wish I could have stayed because I did love that church. The Willow culture, I think, was the most generous church community I've ever been a part of in my life. Within seconds, people were calling, sending. We had people set up neighborhood drop sites. Within 2 weeks, the Willow generosity. People ask me all the time, what was the hardest part about the house fire? And probably for my wife, it was losing everything, all the kids' first stuff and all that. For me, it was the generosity. People dropping off hundreds of dollars and piles of gift cards and, hugging us. They for as much crap the Willow Creek, culture has gotten, especially in the last 5 years, for us, like that generosity changed our lives. It set us on a new path. We were able to, dream again. But then at that point, it really became apparent that I wanted to stay at this church, but I couldn't deal with what I'll call power abuse and just that emotional abuse of like, oh, I see you took Tuesday off, that, you're going to make that up during the week. And I'm like, wait a minute, I just worked 70 hours last week. So I just couldn't keep up with it anymore. I tried to have the conversations in my young leadership. My boss was just, too overpowering. Like I got to the place where I feared him and, I feared his control and I tried the best I could and wish now I could go back at 48 and have those conversations that I was having at whatever that was, 33. Mm-hmm. And, walk him through that as droves of his staff had left. Probably 20 or 30 people had come and gone from his team. And so, even in the midst of that, I was like, okay, God, what do you have for me? And then I tried to leave ministry. I started working on all my licenses to become a financial advisor. And I'm like, I just got to get out of the church world once and for all. At that point, we had four kids, 2 with a rare genetic disorder that was really expensive. And I'm like, God, I just can't work for churches anymore, because as hard as, I'll say this carefully, but as hard as I've worked, as much as I've given to the local church over the years, I don't know if outside of one situation, I ever felt like they cared about paying me what I was worth. Mm-hmm. I think it was, let's just get as much out of them as we can. I think maybe that's why the first church hired me. I was young enough. They didn't have to pay for insurance, and so I advise young pastors now as they're switching churches, as they're wanting to go from the business world into the church world. I'm like, get ready, because most of the churches I've served over the years, they don't have a training and development plan for staff. They tried to bleed you dry. If you do set up boundaries, it's quickly pressed with, why are you, you work for the church. You should be available. For instance, when we lived in the parsonage, right across the parking lot from that first church I worked at, and I thought living in the parsonage was going to be the greatest thing ever. And then I realized very quickly that we had 300 landlords, 300 landlords.
Yeah.
And these people, God bless them. Like, I think, some of them were so godly and so kind, but they just didn't understand, the crazy unfair expectations they put on the pastor and the pastor's family. So, every stop along the way, I prayed that prayer, God, could we do that? So when I finally did Plant Thrive, when you and I worked together, and, I tried to do the best I could to create a culture from what I learned at Willow, but then take out the, one person says it all, does it all, top of the hill. Let's be collaborative. Let's create a place people want to be. We're not killing people, recognizing all of that. So yeah, all of that in a roundabout way. That's kind of, some of those pastoral places that led me.
I think it's a good reminder as everything that's come out about the Willow culture and Bill Hybels and, just the abuse that he did, all of that. I remember listening to that, the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, and, there's a lot of abuse in Mark Driscoll's wake, but still within the communities that he created, there were moments of beauty and connection. And I thought that podcast did a good job, not of just saying, look at all this evil, but like, look at the stories that are also in there. It's this blend of generosity and abuse in such a weird, confusing way that it's like, oh, I don't want to say bad things about it, but there's a lot of bad things about it. But then there was these good things that were in the midst of it as well. So you planted Thrive, and you decided to do things differently there. And, I got to experience that leadership culture under you. I think it was about 2 years after you got going, 3 years maybe. I hopped in, and you had a different culture there. It was a fun culture. It was still that we want to reach the masses kind of a culture, get as many people here, do as much good as possible kind of culture. And was there a downside to, there was the downside of the Hybels Willow Creek method that was just pushing and abuse. Was there a downside to, doing things differently at Thrive that was a big challenge for you?
We wanted to do something different at Thrive. So we wanted to plant a church, create a community for the outsiders. I loved being at Willow. I thought they did a good job. I never subscribed to the, seeker sensitive is, crap, and they're not really raising up disciples. I mean, I met so many unbelievably godly people at my time at Willow, and you think back, even the leadership at Willow, they got all the same complaints that churches do that don't have, an all-star lineup of teachers. I mean, Bill always heard that the preaching wasn't deep enough. And at one point you had Bill Hybels, John Ortberg, Case for Christ guy.
That guy.
Anyways, yeah, you had him. I mean, you just had this amazing string. And so, I wanted to take and I will say this about the Willow culture, they had the most things in place to care for staff. We had counseling stipends. We had, they gave us a budget to care for people, so there were some great things. So I wanted to take some of that, but then I also wanted to create, an environment. So you got to think it's kind of funny too. I go from the very wealthy suburbs, northwest suburbs of Chicago, to the middle of the state of Michigan, where the average median income was $28,000. I mean, the poverty level was outstanding. And, it was a very, I would say church conservative town, because very Catholic. And so when we started Thrive, we wanted it to be a place where people who had given up on God or given up on church would feel welcome. And so we were in a movie theater. We had a tagline that was not your mama's church, unless, of course, your mom goes there. I mean, it's just, I think back now and I'm like, it's cute. It's silly. It offended everyone and 10 people. I was okay with that. So we wanted to create that environment where somebody who was like, I got so hurt by church, I'm not walking back in. Or someone who was like, I've never been a part of church, but God could never love me. We wanted to create an environment where they were absolutely loved. And so I think if I could go back, the thing that I would do differently is I think we were too obsessed on the unchurched person. It wasn't a balance. I think you've got to create a community where, yes, those people can feel welcome, accepted, and loved, where they can get their questions answered, where they can find community. But you also have to create a community where people are given the opportunity to experience the depth of God's word and, accountability and discipleship and, meeting in homes with people and sharing meals. And so, we tried to do a balance of all that. I think at some point the pendulum just swung too far on the unchurched side. And maybe we partied too much. We talked all the time about how, Jesus went to a party, right? I mean, he turned the water into wine, for Pete's sakes. And so, we created a lot of parties. And I think what I was trying to do is my last couple of years was Thrive, and I was hoping to get to the 10-year mark. I knew from the beginning I wasn't going to be at Thrive forever. I knew that because I never really fit in the smaller central Michigan community. I was born and raised in the city of Detroit, lived in the suburbs of Chicago. I like a big city. All of a sudden I'm here. Mount Pleasant's not super tiny, but it's a town of 18,000, lots of smaller towns. I lived 20 minutes outside of town. I passed farms. I'd never seen a farm as a kid. And so, I came to love the slower pace. I came to love the people in that community, and I really did, but I never felt like I fit. I miss the faster pace of life. I miss the, people just trying to go and do and explore more things. I miss the diversity. Mount Pleasant was 92% white. I'll never forget when we adopted a Chinese son and taking him, in some of the more rural areas the first time. I mean, it was like, holy cow, like we are definitely getting the stares and all of that. So I thought I was going to be at Thrive a lot longer. I really wish I could have made it to the 10-year mark. And I tried to prime my elders, my staff, the church, that someday I would live in Florida. I've just always wanted to live somewhere warm. I actually wanted to plant a church where I live now, but my wife just wasn't ready to move that far away from family when we planted Thrive. And so we did it. And so what I tried to bring from Willow was the culture of taking care of staff the best that we could. But then when I tried to not bring from Willow was, killing staff, pushing them to the absolute brink. If we started to recognize it in someone, I'd just say, hey, all right, we're going to take a time out, we're going to make sure that we do that, and then I tried to create a place where, the culture for the church and the staff, hey, we all got baggage for whatever reason. Some churches, you can't show up with that baggage in clear sight. You've got to hide that baggage and you got to pretty yourself up. And we wanted to create a culture where it was like, no, just bring the baggage, because we're going to show you how Jesus can heal you, how being in a community that will love you, will help you work through that baggage and, all of that kind of stuff. So, I absolutely loved it. I tried to emulate some of the things, I tried to do a strategic organization approach. I mean, you know how much I love my documents and my strategic plans and thinking through each quarter and, which area are we going to put the most emphasis into right now? And, I just didn't do my homework, right? Because, Chicago moves very, very fast. Central Michigan, not so fast. And so if I could go backwards, and redo it, the very beginning of Thrive, I was Mr. Hype Man, every single day on Facebook, this Sunday is going to be the greatest Sunday in the world. You've got to be there. It's going to be the best Sunday. You can't miss. And I took everything so personally those first couple of years when people missed our baptism Sunday, when people skipped our anniversary Sunday, when people, took vacation. I mean, how dare they? I took it so personally because it was so, for me, everything rose and fell on how this church was going to quote unquote succeed. I had this team I planned it through a great organization, but then they set me up with a team of pastors who were our first elders, and they were all megachurch pastors. And so, for them, it was like, hey, you got to grow. You got to grow. And I kind of fell back into the bad habits of like, I got to do everything I can to grow this church. And we did, 18 months in, we grew to over 500 people on a Sunday, which, we didn't use any, most church plants are dumping thousands of dollars in the marketing. We didn't have it. So we didn't do that. It was all word of mouth. We were caring for people, loving people. And then on my 40th birthday, I get a phone call from one of our best volunteers at church. And they were apologizing profusely to me. I didn't know what they were talking about. And then they finally told me I didn't mean to sleep with him. And this volunteer had slept with a teenage boy. She was a mom of 5 and made a terrible mistake. And, lives fell apart at that place, and our growth was like, it was a rocket ship. And in my head, I'm like, oh man, I'm the next Perry Noble. Oh, here we go. And then it was like, small town, news traveled fast. Some people in the church wanted us to kind of bring her up front and, scar and tar and feather her. So, some people were upset because we were too hard on them. So we lost dozens and dozens of people. It was just another, one of those moments where I was like, okay, God, what are you doing here? And so, I did the best I could. And then eventually got to a place where, I learned that, for me in my own ministry, I lived on the phrase excellence honors God and inspires people, right? That was a big phrase at Willow. I wanted to keep it through at Thrive. Like, we got to do things with excellence, right? Like Jesus didn't do anything, that was not excellent. And I just saw time and time again over the years that phrase was used to push staff members to the brink, push the church to the brink, to the place where, it was like, hey, we're not giving people any real tools to grow on their own. People in their neighborhood wouldn't know that they're a Christ follower, but they're here every Sunday holding a door, they're volunteering all the time. And our staff members are working 60, 70 hours a week so we can grow this machine, because the machine, is God's church and it's the hope of the world. And I raised that excellence banner. And then I just got to the place where I'm like, we just got to put people over excellence, people over tasks. Now, I'm a hypocritical. You and I talk about this all the time. I'm a hypocritical megachurch attender. Like, I still attend a megachurch, and it's kind of crazy to me that we do. I don't know. I left my last ministry position pretty wounded, beat up, and I was pretty much done. I came to Florida to be an executive pastor. I ended up being the 5th executive pastor in 5 years. And I was just done. I just couldn't. That first Sunday, I was like, okay, God, I get to sleep in. I'm not going to wake up for church. And it was like the Holy Spirit took the blankets off. Ooh, that's a good Pentecostal metaphor for you. And I got up that morning and went to this big giant mega church, and I just sat in the back and cried. I was like, okay, like, I think I'm done. And then I started this organization called Speak with People, which is a company. We're not a ministry per se. We want to reach leaders. We want to help them improve their communication skills. But the first 8 months, because my whole identity has always been pastoring a church, I led this thing like a ministry. And it just didn't go very far, very fast, because, I've always kind of had the ministry mindset. And also I kind of had the poverty mindset, right? Like all those years that I heard, we can't pay you more, we can't do, bonuses for the staff. We can't do this. We can't do that, which going back to Willow was the only church that I served at over the years that I think truly did give staff financial bonuses that were, pretty helpful. Now I was there in 2008 when everything bottomed out and we didn't get it obviously for the next couple of years, but
I remember 2008.
Yeah. So anyways, a little bit of a rabbit trail to say, I left that church and then I started attending this mega church, and I still now struggle with, I love the church. I've gotten to know many of the pastors. I've had conversations with them about all this stuff, but I still now go, okay, I'm kind of a hypocritical mega church attender because I'm like, okay, is this how the structure of church should work? Should churches be this big? You and I had Dr. Benjamin Kokar, back in the day at William Tyndale, just a genius Bible professor from communist, Romania. He actually served jail time, because he, read the Bible, and he got thrown into jail. He's, preaching the Bible. And he used to say all the time, you American Christians are garbage. You want all the garbage of the world, and, we talk about, all of that kind of stuff. And he would always say churches should be 150 people. That's as much as a pastor can shepherd. And I'm like, no, they got to be thousands and thousands, because with thousands of people, you can do so much more good for the world. Right. And so for years, I'm like, okay, it's just got to grow. It's got to be big. Healthy things grow. And, I now am in a phase where I both kind of villainize and like the mega church. I like it because it's easy, right? I walk in, there's tons of people. The music is incredible, right? The production is incredible. They spend more on lighting repair than we probably had in our whole budget at Thrive. It's just kind of the kids ministry, right? They do really fun, creative, amazing things. But then on the other hand, I've been there a year and a half. It's difficult, to really dive into community, unless you want to sit around a table at a Bible study or you want to, do something else. And so I'm at that place where I'm going, okay, I'm trying to work through what is it in me that wants to remain at the mega church when I feel like a smaller church, would be more beneficial. But then the smaller churches, for a guy like me that's been in the mega church for years, is uncomfortable. I walk into the room and if the room's full, I'm like, but why? Where did I get that? That was kind of, hardwired into me all those years at the mega church. And so then I also kind of the hypocritical mega church attender, because I'm like, I'm tired of the CEO pastor, I'm tired of the CEO pastor and the non-shepherd pastor. But then on the other hand, I'm like, wow, they've got this great teaching team, that does all of this incredible things. And so, so I'm in a really fascinating phase now where I'm just trying to figure out how to, fit into the church, because for 26 years, I was a vocational pastor at that church. And probably last fall, as I was trying to break free, if the church I attended would have offered me a job, and, even though like I met with, the senior executive pastor and he would ask me, what do you think? And I'd bring him pages, how I am, Tom, of like, well, your systems, if you work on these type of things, you might be able to close the back door. And if you get this system right. And, if he would have been like, hey, what would it take for you to come on our team? I probably would have hopped on it. It wouldn't have been the best thing for me. But what I've tried to do is not give up on the church. And that's been really, really difficult. We've attended, I volunteer, I'm way back into youth ministry days. I have, a group of 10th grade boys that I volunteer with, which is just fascinating. I do preaching coaching for a couple of the pastors there. And so, I'm trying not to be in a place where I totally walk away from the church, because I still believe the church is the bride of Christ. I believe that I do believe that because of Jesus, the church is the hope of the world. But I'm just trying to work through at 48, after all these experiences of the church, why does the church have to hurt so many people? Why do so many people have to leave with their hearts ripped out? And that's not everybody's story. It's not. But I've talked with dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of people who that story is. And so how can that story be changed? That's kind of what I'm trying to get to in this next season of life.
I see that. You're like describing real time, the liminal space you're occupying, which, the title of this podcast is Liminal Living, and you're in that space. And, we've had people who have deconstructed out of the faith. We've had people who've deconstructed from, theologically, from conservative to more progressive. We've had a lot of, your deconstruction that you're going through is not necessarily theologically, but more of ecclesial, the
Yes.
role of the church and how that church should function, and what the role of pastors should be in this, and how it should operate. And you're real time, not having the answers, but you're occupying this space of, I don't want to give up on this, but I see all this hurt that's been caused. I've experienced all this hurt personally as well, but there's also beauty in there somewhere. And that liminal space is, that's a messy place to occupy. What are some practices that you have been doing or you have done that kind of help you in that space of, I'm not where I was, but I'm not there yet either? What are some things that you've done to kind of help you through this time?
Yeah, I think, you and I have had a lot. I should be sending, counselor dollars to you. A lot.
You leadership dollars, you send me the counseling dollars, and they cancel each other out.
I think our, Sunday morning walks, as I've been trying to figure all this out, I even had a church planning organization in Florida tell me, they had a 6-figure check waiting for me if I wanted to plant a church, that to me, the achiever, that sounded exciting, because I'm like, I would have loved to plant a church in this kind of population density with this type of economic reality and this type of diversity. But I just would have, been going through the motions again. And so what I've been doing, I think our conversations that we've been talking through, role of the church, role of the pastor, kind of that, finding my identity. For years it was, Jason, the mega church youth pastor, and then it was Jason, the church planter. And so, kind of reforming that identity, spending lots of time just talking, to Jesus about it. And then I think, I've been trying to be a change agent from the inside. I didn't want to just be one of these angry people online who's bashing the church and, this is ridiculous and this is horrible. And I at least wanted to try to get in, build some friendships with people, and, see if I could do any good, and for the most part, I got to say, the leaders at my church have treated me with the utmost respect. I remember when people used to come to me, and it's real easy as a pastor or a leader, when somebody is coming to you with critique or criticism or complaining or negativity, to kind of just say, well, I'm not going to take to put much stock into them, especially if they're not giving, or if they're not serving, or if they don't have the same experience. Because it's different, right? The pastoral seat, you see the 30,000 foot view, you see how everything works, and I've prefaced so many conversations I've had with the leaders of my church of hey, I'm not in your seat. I don't know all the inner workings. I don't know your existing systems. I just know from my perspective as someone who, I read all the church emails. I wonder what your beliefs are. I wonder how you work your systems. This didn't work for me, that kind of thing. And so they've been real honoring to me. I wonder in this day and age, though, why churches don't lean on people like me more often. I mean, they really do, right? Hey, come hold a door, come hold a baby, come sit with a group of 10th grade boys as they make sexual innuendos. And you don't even know what they're talking about, because, it's 2023 and you're like, I have no clue what you're talking about, but it sounds dirty. Come fit one of those roles. But I wonder, and I think it's something we tried to do at Thrive, but I don't know how successful we were. But why don't some of these pastors, build teams of people from within who are going, okay, you love this place. This is your church. Is it working? Walk us through what are things that you're seeing from the outside? It's almost like the mega church is the brand, right? And unless you're hyped up on the brand and you're totally focused on the brand, then they'll pay all the attention in the world to you. And I kind of experienced that too. I went to a Lutheran high school, and I was sort of the it musician in my Lutheran high school. And everybody wanted me to go to the Lutheran college. And I just wasn't a Lutheran. I just could never wrap my mind around the Lutheran theology. But I grew up in Detroit. And so my parents, they didn't feel safe putting me in the school in my neighborhood. And so they drove me out. And so when I left the Lutheran school and I didn't go down the Lutheran path, it was like all those connections were cut off. And I saw these other people connecting and I was like, oh man, it would have been so much fun. I love Martin Luther as much as anybody, but I kind of felt the same way, and now I think it's interesting in this perspective now, because I travel and preach in different churches, and I just have a totally different perspective on how I would lead a church if in 2024 God said, hey, you're going to lead this church. Now that I've been the guy sitting in the seat, hearing, on social media all week, you can't miss this Sunday. It's going to be the greatest Sunday ever. Why would you miss, and now I'm like, hey, how about you talk to me about something that's important in my life? Like, don't just tell me not to miss. Tell me like, hey, are you tired of arguing with your wife? Well, Jesus has some things to say about that. Or, is your heart broken because your mom has leukemia? Let's see how scripture can bring you hope, instead of just, you got to be here. We're doing, tailgate Sunday, with a donut wall. I'm not picking on those kind of things. I'm just saying I put so much stock in those things in the past. If I led a church today, I would spend so much time just, dealing with the things that, are most important to people, instead of some of those external things, which as a pastor, I got caught up in is my numbers growing, the right people in the seats, are my small groups growing? How's our giving? I think those numbers are important because you want the church to stay alive and open, but I would kind of remap those things to make sure that those weren't, the main priority. So that's some of the things that I would do. I still love the church. I'm still trying to figure out how to partner with her, how to, walk alongside of her, and figure her out. And so it's really an interesting place to be.
Well, I want to thank you for being able to come on and just share your experiences and honestly talking about like where you currently are with this thing called the church and how you're wrestling through things and being in that liminal space. I think this is an important conversation to talk about all different kinds of liminal spaces that we experience. And yours has been a valuable conversation for me. Your friendship has been priceless for me. And I just value everything that you are. So thank you for being here.
Well, I appreciate that, sir. And thank you for letting me share and unpack parts of the story. I hope it's helpful for some as they're walking through some similar paths. So appreciate you very, very much.
Well, thank you for listening to the Liminal Living podcast and listening to my conversation here with Jason. And I hope that you connected with kind of the friendship that we have, that it was a connection point for you and his story also, that there was something that you pull out of here as you possibly are struggling with church hurt and role of church and wherever you find yourself. I just want to encourage you to be patient and compassionate with yourself. And if you're on the other side of church and not sure what to think of it, take your time. Give yourself space and figure things out. And that's what liminal space is for that redefining of yourself and your relationship to those things. And next week we have another good conversation, and I will see you then. Have a wonderful week.